Welcome to Personal Injury Claims Explained by Foyle Legal, your trusted source for personal injury claims in Western Australia. Each week, we simplify complex legal issues, from motor vehicle accidents to workplace injuries, so you can confidently navigate your rights and secure the compensation you deserve.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Looks like we're tackling some pretty serious stuff today. Criminal injuries compensation, right here in WA. Got a file right here. Layman's Guide from Foyle Legal. They know their stuff, let me tell you.
Oh, absolutely. Foyle Legal's got a great reputation. This guide is a fantastic resource for anyone looking for a clear explanation of the CIC scheme.
Definitely. But before we jump in, the usual disclaimer.
Yeah.
This is for information only, not legal advice. Think of it as like prepping for that call with an expert, all right?
Exactly. We're giving you the lay of the land so you can have a more productive conversation with a legal professional.
Love it. Okay, so say you're in a situation where you need to apply for CIC.
Yeah.
First things first, who can even apply? You'd think, oh, just the person directly hurt.
This seems logical, right?
Yeah, makes sense. But in CIC world, it's a bit broader than that. The person directly harmed, they're the primary victim.
Mm-hmm.
But get this, close relatives can apply too. They're considered indirect victim.
And close relatives, it's not just your immediate family either. We're talking parents, grandparents, even step-parents, spouses, of course, children, and believe it or not, even grandkids.
Grandkids. Whoa, that really shows you how far-reaching the impact of a crime can be, huh?
Absolutely. It acknowledges that the trauma from a crime can reverberate through families and across generations.
Makes you think, hold on, someone just hit me. Injury. What does that actually mean in this whole CIC thing?
Good question. Injury in this context, it's not just about physical harm. We're talking about the psychological impact too. So mental and nervous shock that's covered. And get this pregnancy.
Pregnancy. Seriously. I mean, it makes sense, but that's not the first thing that comes to mind.
It really highlights that criminal acts can have these long-lasting repercussions impacting way more than just your physical well-being, right?
Right.
Family planning, personal choices, it's all connected.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah.
But important to know. So let's say you are eligible. What can you actually get compensation for? What are we talking about here?
It's a pretty broad range, actually. You've got the obvious ones like medical costs, lost income, both what you've already lost and what you might lose in the future because of the crime. But then it gets really interesting.
Like what?
Well, for instance, costs for psychological treatment, even travel expenses for those appointments if you have to travel a distance to get help. Let's say your property got damaged during the crime, that's covered too.
Wow. It's surprisingly comprehensive.
It is. It's designed to be as holistic as possible, recognizing that the impacts of crime can be far-reaching.
So anything people often overlook, something they might not think of.
Oh, absolutely. Loss of enjoyment of life is a big one. A lot of people don't even realize they can claim for that.
Loss of enjoyment of life. Okay. Got to unpack that. What does that actually look like in the real world?
Think of it this way. You loved hiking before, but now open spaces just trigger anxiety because of what happened. Or maybe your hobby was all about socializing, but now you can't handle being around people. That change, that's loss of enjoyment of life, and the assessor will consider that. But you need proof. Detailed records are going to be your best friend here.
Right, because how do you prove something like that? I'm already sensing this paperwork is intense.
It can be. Documentation is key.
Okay, let's say something happened a while ago. Is there a time limit on applying for CIC?
See, you're thinking like a true deep diver now. That time frame is super important. Here in WA, you've generally got 3 years from when the crime happened to lodge your claim.
3 years? I mean, that sounds like a long time, but also not really, especially with something this major.
I hear you. Dealing with the aftermath of a crime, it's tough. But good news is extensions are possible.
Seriously. So it's not an automatic no after 3 years. That's a release. What kind of situations would allow for an extension?
Lots of things could be considered. Like, if the crime happened when the victim was a child, there's a good chance an extension would be granted. Or, say, someone lives remotely and couldn't access help easily. That could be a reason. Mental health plays a big part, too. If someone wasn't in the right headspace to apply earlier, the assessor would take that into account.
So there's some flexibility there. That's good to hear. Now, flip side, are there situations where someone's out of luck, even if they meet the basic criteria?
Unfortunately, yes. There are some exclusions that could prevent someone from getting compensation, even if they meet the other requirements.
Like what? Give me an example where someone might think they're good to go, but actually aren't.
Okay, here's one that trips people up. If the compensation could somehow benefit the offender. So, say the victim is still in a relationship with the person who hurt them. The thinking is any money going to the victim could indirectly help the offender, creating a conflict. Another tricky one is if the victim was doing something illegal when they got hurt, like injured during a drug deal. That could be a problem.
Wow. Okay. Those are very specific scenarios. So even if you think an exclusion might apply, it's still worth talking to a lawyer, right?
Absolutely. The law is rarely black and white. There might be exceptions or ways to argue against an exclusion, depending on the specifics of the situation. That's where having a legal expert on your side is invaluable.
They can help you navigate those legal gray
Mm.
areas. Now, let's talk police. I know this is something people always wonder about. Reported the crime to be eligible for CIC.
It's true that cooperating with the police is generally expected, but it's not just about whether an arrest was made or if they got a conviction.
So it's more about the victim's willingness to help with the investigation, even if it doesn't lead to, like, catching the offender.
Precisely. The assessor, they're like the judge of your application, right?
Yeah.
They want to see that you genuinely tried to assist the police, even if it doesn't result in an arrest or conviction.
Makes sense. They want to see you're doing your part. Okay, let's talk money. Everyone wants to know, how much can you actually get through CIC?
$1 million question, right? Well, it's tricky. The maximum amount you can receive, it depends on two main things. How bad the injury was, so the severity, and here's the curveball, the date of the crime.
Wait, the date matters. Why is that?
Well, the maximum payout amounts, they've changed over time. It's kind of like they adjust for inflation and things like that.
That is fascinating. Makes sense, though, to keep pace with, the cost of living and all that.
Exactly.
Anything else to know about how they figure out the amount? Like, are there any other factors that come into play?
Oh, good point. Here's something else to keep in mind. If multiple offenses are related, like they happen close together, they might be treated as one single event for compensation purposes. So it's not always as simple as just adding up the maximum for each separate thing that happened.
Okay, so let's say someone's in a situation where they think they might be eligible. What's step
Right.
one? How do they actually apply for CIC?
Well, the application itself has three main parts. There's the application form itself, then there's a victim impact statement, and then you've got supporting evidence. And the best part is you can actually apply online now through the eCourt portal.
Oh, that's handy. Is it pretty user-friendly?
It's designed to be as straightforward as possible. You can even start the application, save your progress, and come back later. Lifesaver, let me tell you. Plus, all the communication, the documents, it can all be handled online, which definitely speeds things up.
That's a game changer, especially when you're dealing with something heavy and emotionally charged. But let's be real, gathering all that supporting evidence, that sounds like a mountain of paperwork. And it's not just about having it right. It needs to be the right stuff. What are we talking about here?
You nailed it. Quality over quantity, for sure. We're talking about anything that backs up your claims. So think witness statements, for starters. Then you've got police reports. Those are gold, right? Official record of what went down. And of course, medical records are crucial, especially if you've got physical injuries or mental health issues that stem from the crime. We're talking doctors, hospitals, therapists, anyone who's treated you. Oh, and don't underestimate the power of photos. Pictures of injuries, any property damage, those can be really impactful.
Right. Future's worth 1,000 words, as they say. Are there any types of documents that people tend to struggle with getting their hands on? Like, are there any common roadblocks there?
You're right. Gathering all this can feel overwhelming. One common hurdle is getting those official documents, things like hospital records or those all-important police reports.
Yeah, that sounds like a bureaucratic nightmare waiting to happen.
It can be a bit of a maze, for sure. But here's a pro tip. Freedom of Information requests, or FOI requests for short. Those are your new best friend.
Okay, FOI requests. Break that down for us regular folks. What are they and why are they so important here?
Basically, an FOI request is a formal way to request access to information that's held by government agencies. That includes things like, you guessed it, police records and medical files. You have a right to access your own information, and this is how you exercise that right.
So if you hit a wall trying to get those crucial documents, an FOI request is like the key to unlock them.
Exactly. And for CIC applications, that paper trail, it can make or break your case.
Got it. That's incredibly helpful to know. Now let's talk about this victim impact statement. It's clearly important, but to be honest, it also sounds kind of intimidating. What advice would you give to someone who's about to put their experience into words?
I hear you. It can feel daunting. But the victim impact statement is your chance to really connect with the assessor on a human level, to help them understand the full impact of the crime on you, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, even financially. It's about painting a picture of your life before the crime and how it's changed since.
That must be an incredibly tough and potentially triggering thing to have to revisit.
You're absolutely right. Be kind to yourself throughout this process. If it gets overwhelming, don't hesitate to reach out for support. A therapist, a counselor, even just a trusted friend or family member can make a world of difference.
And remember, there's no right way to write it. It's your experience, your story. Tell it your way.
Exactly. Don't feel like you have to downplay the impact or put on a brave face. Be honest, be open, and let your emotions come through. And hey, remember your lawyer. They're not just there for the legal stuff. They can actually help you draft the statement, make sure it's structured effectively, and presents your experience powerfully.
That's reassuring to know. You don't have to go it alone. Okay, so you've poured your heart into the victim impact statement. You've gathered all this evidence. Then what? What's the waiting game like? How long does this whole assessment process actually take?
The million-dollar question, right? How long until I know? Unfortunately, there's no easy answer there. Every case is different. But generally speaking, you're looking at several months, maybe even a couple of years.
Wow. Okay, so patience is definitely a virtue with CIC. What's happening behind the scenes during that time? What are they actually assessing?
So the assessor, they're like the decision maker for your case. They're reviewing everything you've submitted, your application, your statement, all the evidence. But here's the thing. They don't just look at what you've given them. They can gather information from other sources too. Think police records, medical reports, even information from the offender. They can request additional documents from all sorts of places. It's a very thorough investigation.
So they might be digging around, even if you don't hear from them directly. That's interesting. What about hearings? Are those a common thing in CIC cases?
Sometimes, if there are conflicting stories or if the assessor needs more details to make a decision, they might hold a private hearing. If that happens, just remember you have the right to have your lawyer there with you.
Which makes total sense. Having someone there who understands the process and can advocate for you, that must be a huge help. Sounds like this assessor has a lot of power in this whole process.
They do. They have to weigh all the evidence, consider everyone's side of the story, and ultimately decide whether to award compensation and how much. It's a big responsibility.
Okay, so you've been through the ringer. You've anxiously awaited the assessor's decision. What if you don't agree with it? What can you do?
That's where the appeals process comes in. If you're unhappy with the outcome, whether you were denied compensation altogether or you feel like the amount awarded wasn't enough, you have the right to appeal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you're unhappy with the outcome, whether you were denied compensation altogether or you feel like the amount awarded wasn't enough, you have the right to appeal. Appealing a decision, that sounds like, oh, great, opening up a whole new can of worms. What's involved in that?
Yeah, you're not wrong. Appeals can be pretty complex. Here in WA, you've got a tight window, just 21 days from the day the assessor made their decision to lodge your appeal with the district court.
21 days.
Yeah.
That's cutting it close, especially when you're already dealing with like the emotional roller coaster of this whole thing.
Exactly. It's a short window, which is why it's so crucial to have a lawyer in your corner from the get-go. They can help you figure out if appealing is the right move and then guide you through the process, making sure everything's filed correctly and, most importantly, on time.
So having that legal support can make all the difference, not just in understanding the initial application, but also if you end up needing to appeal.
Couldn't agree more. It's always smart to have an expert on your side, especially when you're dealing with something as important as this.
Okay, any other must-knows about CIC before we wrap things up? Any last nuggets of wisdom for our deep diver?
You know what? There are a couple of things that people often forget about. First, keep in mind that if you're getting Centrelink benefits, receiving CIC could actually affect them. It's always best to check with Centrelink directly just to see how your specific situation might be impacted.
Right. Better to be safe than sorry. Get that clarification.
Exactly. And here's the other thing. It doesn't happen all the time. But if you happen to owe money to the state, think unpaid fines, court fees, that sort of thing, the assessor can actually use some of your CIC money to settle those debts before they give you the rest.
Whoa, I had no idea. Makes sense, but that's definitely something to be aware of.
Transparency is key.
For sure. Well, this has been incredibly eye-opening. We've covered so much ground, from who can apply and what they can claim to time limits, those FOI requests, even appeals. It's a lot.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you. Hopefully our listeners feeling much more equipped to navigate the criminal injuries compensation scheme here in WA.
Absolutely. But as we said at the beginning, this is just a starting point, right? It's like you're springboarded into deeper research and, most importantly, getting that personalized advice. Remember, everyone's situation is unique, and this info isn't a substitute for actually talking to a qualified legal professional.
Couldn't agree more. Getting guidance from an experienced lawyer is always the best way to go.
100%. This whole deep dive, it got me thinking about something.
Yeah.
As crucial as the CIC scheme is, it also kind of makes you wonder, what else can we do? How can we support victims of crime in a more, holistic way, I guess, not just financially, but emotionally and practically to help them truly heal and rebuild their lives?
That's such an important question, and it's one that deserves a deep dive of its own, honestly. There's always more to learn, more we can do as a society to support those impacted by crime.
Well said. And on that note, dear listener, we've reached the end of our deep dive into criminal injuries compensation in WA. Remember, knowledge is power. With the right information and support, you can navigate even the most challenging situations. Until next time, keep those curious minds engaged.
Thanks for tuning in to Personal Injury Claims, explained by Foyle Legal. Remember, this podcast is for informational purposes and isn't legal advice. For advice specific to your situation, visit us at Foyle Legal. And don't forget to subscribe or leave a review.